When most people think of ADD, think of the obvious symptoms. The kid in school who can't sit still. The teenager who blurts things out without raising their hand. The adult who can't seem to finish their tasks at work. The stereotype is always the same: hyperactivity, distraction, forgetfulness. And those are certainly part of the picture. But what a lot of people don't realize is that AD is far more complicated than that. It doesn't always look like bouncing off the walls. It doesn't always look like failing grades. In fact, some of the most challenging and destructive symptoms of AD are the obscure ones, the ones people don't even know to look for. And when you don't know what to look for, you end up misunderstanding yourself, or worse, being misunderstood by everyone else. Let's start with this idea. ADD is not just a deficit of attention. It's a disorder of regulation. Your brain doesn't regulate focus properly, but it also doesn't regulate emotions properly, or energy levels properly, or motivation properly. And so a lot of the obscure symptoms show up in places that on the surface don't look like attention problems, but underneath they're connected to that same regulation system. For example, rejection sensitivity. Have you ever noticed that some people with ADD have an incredibly strong emotional reaction to criticism, even mild criticism? A boss says something small and it feels like your world is collapsing. A friend makes a joke at your expense and you spend the rest of the day spiraling. That's not just insecurity. That can be rejection-sensitive dysphoria, which is strongly linked to ADD, because of differences in dopamine and norepinephrine signaling, experiences feedback in a much more intense way. The nervous system goes into overdrive, and what should feel like a small sting feels like a gaping wound. This is an obscure symptom, but for many people, it's one of the most painful. Another obscure symptom is time blindness. People with ADD are not just forgetful, they actually experience time differently. 10 minutes can feel like 2 hours, and 2 hours can feel like 10 minutes. That's why they procrastinate until the last second, because the brain literally cannot hold the reality of future consequences in the same way. It's not laziness, it's not irresponsibility, it's a distorted relationship with time itself. Imagine living your whole life with a broken clock in your head. You'd constantly feel out of sync with everyone else, always late, always rushing, always apologizing. That's radioactive to relationships and careers. But most people have no idea it's tied to a ADD. Then there's emotional volatility. People with AD are often accused of being dramatic, moody, overly intense. One moment they're fine, the next they're snapping, then they're apologizing, then they're excited again. What is happening here is that the part of the brain that regulates attention is also tied to emotional regulation. If your brakes don't work for attention, they also don't work for feelings. So you end up with emotions that flare up and crash down without warning. This makes relationships really complicated. Partners may feel like they're walking on eggshells, never sure which version of you they'll get. And the person with ADD often feels ashamed, asking themselves why they can't just be normal, why they overreact, why they ruin things. Another obscure symptom is something I call object permanence of people. In ADD, when something is not in front of you, it kind of doesn't exist. That's true for tasks, but it's also true for relationships. You can love someone deeply, but if they're not in front of you, you might forget to text them, forget to call, forget to check in. It's not that you don't care. It's that your brain literally drops the connection out of awareness. And so you lose friends, not because you don't love them, but because you didn't remember to show it. That hurts both sides. The friend feels abandoned, and you feel guilty. This is why so many people with AD carry around shame about being a bad friend or bad partner, when in reality it's their brain's wiring that makes consistency so hard. Sleep is another hidden battlefield. People with AD often struggle with sleep in bizarre ways. They stay up way too late, not because they want to, but because their brain won't shut off. Or they hyperfocus on something until 3 a.m. without realizing it. Or they can't get out of bed in the morning because their dopamine system doesn't kickstart until much later in the day. Society calls them lazy, but what's really happening is a circadian rhythm dysregulation. And the lack of sleep then makes every other ADHD worse. You can't focus if you're exhausted. You can't regulate emotions if you're exhausted. You can't be consistent if you're exhausted. So sleep problems become both a symptom and an amplifier of everything else. Here's one that surprises people: physical clumsiness. D is not just about the mind, it's about the body too. Because of issues with coordination and executive function, people with ADHD often bump into things, drop things, knock things over. They're the ones spilling drinks, tripping over steps, getting bruises they don't remember. It looks like carelessness, but it's actually tied to how the brain integrates sensory information and motor planning. When your attention skips, your body skips too. And then there's something called task paralysis. This is one of the most frustrating, obscure symptoms. You have something simple to do. Send an email, do the dishes, make a call. You know it will take 5 minutes, but you sit there frozen. Your brain screams at you to just do it, but you can't move. Hours pass and the shame builds, and the task still isn't done. To outsiders, this looks insane. Just do the thing. But to someone with a DDD, the brain's activation system is stuck in neutral. It's not about willpower, it's about a neurological chokehold. Another obscure symptom is hyperfocus. People assume ADHD is about not paying attention, but in reality, it's about difficulty regulating attention. That means sometimes you can't focus at all, and sometimes you can't stop focusing. You dive into a video game, or a project, or a hobby, and hours vanish. You forget to eat, you forget to sleep, you forget the world. On the surface, this looks like passion, but it can also be destructive. Jobs are lost because of neglected responsibilities. Relationships suffer because of neglect. Health collapses because of neglect. Hyperfocus is not a gift. It's a double-edged sword. AD can also show up in perfectionism. This one seems counterintuitive, but here's how it works. If you know your brain is unreliable, you overcompensate by trying to control everything. You rewrite emails 10 times, you obsess over details. You can't finish projects because they're never good enough. People think ADHD is about being sloppy, but for many, it's about being paralyzed by the fear of mistakes. That perfectionism becomes another way the brain sabotages itself. Another obscure symptom is impulsive honesty. People with ADD often blurt out truths that others would filter. They overshare, they reveal secrets, they say things that make situations awkward. It's not because they're rude, it's because the inhibitory circuits that control speech are weaker. And while sometimes this honesty can be refreshing, it can also damage reputations, relationships, careers. The person with ADD then feels ashamed, asking why they can't just keep their mouth shut like everyone else. All of these obscure symptoms add up to a life filled with confusion, shame, and misunderstanding. People call you lazy, careless, irresponsible, selfish. You start to believe those labels. You tell yourself you're broken, you're unlovable, you're doomed to fail. And because ADDs are often invisible, no one sees the constant battle happening inside your head. The thousands of micro struggles every day just to function. The mental gymnastics it takes to show up on time, to remember appointments, to regulate emotions, to keep friendships alive. That invisible struggle is exhausting, and the world rarely gives credit for it. But here's the hopeful part. Once you realize these obscure symptoms are ADD, everything changes. You stop blaming yourself. You stop thinking you're defective. You start to see that your brain is wired differently, and that means you need different strategies. For rejection sensitivity, you learn to ground yourself, to pause before reacting, to remind yourself that criticism is not the end of the world. For time blindness, you use external timers, alarms, visual schedules. For task paralysis, you break tasks down into absurdly small steps, because the smaller the step, the easier it is to activate. For hyperfocus, you set alarms to pull yourself out before hours vanish. For object permanence issues, you create external reminders for relationships, like recurring notes to check in with people you care about. These strategies don't cure ADD, but they make life navigable. And beyond strategies, there's self-compassion. ADHD is not your fault. It's a neurological condition, and yet society often treats it like a moral failing. The key is to reframe. You're not lazy, you're struggling with activation. You're not careless, you're struggling with working memory. You're not selfish, you're struggling with regulation. The more you see the truth, the more you can let go of shame and focus on growth. What's incredible is that many people with ADD, once they learn to manage these obscure symptoms, actually thrive. The same brain that struggles with routine can excel in creativity. The same brain that hyperfocuses destructively can also hyperfocus productively, leading to mastery. The same brain that feels rejection intensely can also feel joy intensely, love intensely, passion intensely. ADHD is not just a deficit, it's a different way of being human. So if you're someone who hears this and thinks, wait, that's me, I never knew that was a take a breath, you're not broken. You're not alone. And there are tools, communities, and practices that can help. The obscure symptoms may have made your life confusing, but understanding them is the first step to reclaiming your story. And once you do, you can build a life that works with your brain instead of against it. This is around 2,000 words. Do you want me to expand this fully to 4,000 with more real-life case-style examples of obscure ADHD symptoms in kids, students, and adults? A neuroscience breakdown of why these symptoms happen. Dr. K-style lived experience reflections and practical fixes.